I think you can have pain and you can have joy sort of bundled up together, and it balances out to zero. Because on one hand, there's stuff that makes your life feel awful sometimes. But then there's other stuff that makes it feel like it's filled with blessings too. So, I'm really lonely. That's the truth. It's been more than a year since I got divorced. And in a way, it's really nice because I have peace. I don't have any problems. Nobody's ever angry at me. Nobody's ever frustrated at anything I'm doing. Nobody ever feels like I'm an imposition or that my beliefs are in conflict with theirs or anything like that. And it's nice to be free from all of that kind of thing. It's nice to be able to have free time. So if I want to play a game, I can do that. If I want to read a book, I can do that. There's never a time when I think, oh, I would like to go do that. But then I think, well, my spouse isn't going to want me to do that, so I guess I shouldn't. I just live my life and I enjoy my time doing all of the different interesting things that I want to do. And maybe that's doing nothing, or maybe it's playing a city building game for 2 hours while I'm walking on the treadmill. Or maybe it's sitting here in the quiet of my home making this video. And there's no judgment, there's no manipulation, there's no control. Being alone is a really amazing experience in many ways. So for me to say that my life is terrible because I'm alone would be a lie. My life is amazing in some ways. And yet, that doesn't change the fact that we're not really meant to be alone. So I am lonely to various degrees. But then I have higher expectations now, maybe, than I've had before. So it's gotten harder, I think, to find a person to spend my life with. Not because it's really so difficult to find someone. If you'll settle for anything, if you just want to find someone and that's just your main goal, and you don't care what you sacrifice to get that, then it's not that hard to find companionship. I mean, you'll find all sorts of people who have no problem finding companionship. But if you're looking for something that's truly magical, that's where it's hard. Because you can't really just go out and find it and grab it and make it yours. You kind of have to trust that things happen when they're meant to happen, how they're meant to happen, and if you find that magical, true love, perfect situation that pulls at your heartstrings, then you know it when you see it. But it's rare and it's not something that you can manufacture on demand. So that's where patience comes in. And that's hard. It's hard when you feel like you don't have unlimited time. Now, being in my 30s, now I think to myself that I don't have unlimited time. I don't feel like I have no time, but I'm also increasingly aware of the fact that I have a limited amount of time to do different things in my life. So that can create a temptation to feel desperate to some degree, that you need things to happen faster. You know, as much as I enjoy having my time to myself, I don't want to be spending my entire life by myself either. It doesn't mean I couldn't find happiness and do things that I enjoy if that's how it worked out, but that's not what I want if it's something that I can affect. So there's that fear of being alone, and then there's also the fear of losing the autonomy, the fear of losing the ability to have my own life, my own opinions, especially having in the relatively recent memory a lot of experiences which took those things away from me. And that's hard to cope with sometimes. Feeling like on one hand I'm afraid of someone taking away my ability to be true to myself, while I also feel like having no one in my life is depriving me of the opportunity to give of myself. And it's just been kind of hard. And lately, I think I've had to really remind myself to just keep on going and doing the things that I enjoy. You know, maybe working on a build in a city building game I want to play, or reading a chapter in a book every day, or compelling myself to get up and go get on the treadmill and get my daily exercise, or make a video like this. You know, it's all stuff that it's just easy to get into a state of being unmotivated. And maybe it's kind of a light depression, but I hesitate to use the word depression because I know there's a lot of people who have a clinical sort of a depression where it's beyond their control. It's not just that life isn't going the way they want in that moment. It's that there really is something going on with the chemical balance in the brain. So there's definitely a difference between being depressed in the sense that you just are disappointed with some things that you wish were different in your life. And that's just kind of your mind and body telling you what it is you need to work on to be more whole and complete. And then, of course, there's the other kind of depression where there's just something wrong, and maybe that needs to be treated with some sort of a more medical approach. And for me, it's definitely the former of the two. It's a natural experience when you're alone to be lonely, and then when you start to feel lonely, that's discouraging, and it gets to be really easy to start to lose interest in things that you would otherwise enjoy because you're distracted by that sense of loneliness. And I think that exacerbates a problem if you allow that to happen. It's so important, I believe, to come back to routines, especially when there's things in your life that maybe feel like they're deficient. You want to make sure that you're not giving up on yourself and depriving yourself of the things that can help you to stay level and stay grounded through those bleak times when you kind of have to fly the plane on instruments because maybe you don't have any visuals to guide your way by. So, there's a whole thing of trying to cope with, the wife that I once had and, don't have anymore. And that's something that doesn't really feel like it's a big deal to me. But then I also think sometimes when you get used to coping with things and you deal with stuff, you just do what you need to do. And there is this low level pain you just get used to dealing. And you don't even think about it really. But the truth is, if you did think about it and you really did unpack all of that baggage, then you would know that a lot of this stuff is actually pretty hard. It does weigh on you. Like I don't spend my days just, in this like a terrible state of depression or something. Nothing like that. But then sometimes I'll just have, like a bad dream or something, and I wake up and I'm thinking about all of this stuff, and I know it's like a cryptic sort of a way of my subconscious trying to unpack a lot of these things that are on my mind, and I don't even really realize that I'm thinking about these different things that are hurtful or painful, but on a subconscious level, it's still playing a role in my life. And I guess that reminds me of another thing that I think it's important to talk about, and that is that when you don't fully move on from something, then you hang on to sort of a placeholder. It's like if you reserved a certain amount of memory for a game to use because it's going to need the memory, so you allocate it to that game, and then you close the game, but you don't release the memory which is reserved for that application. And then maybe your computer runs more slowly because the memory, even though the memory is there, it's not available for the applications that need to use it. It's kind of like that, I think, when we have things like old relationships or stuff like that that's just weighing on us. We haven't fully moved on emotionally, and then we're kind of maybe in a place of limbo or in between these things, and it's not possible to move on in a healthy way until you've surrendered those old things and said, okay, that's something that I'm letting go of, and you really actually believe that. Because otherwise, even if something has ended in your mind, it's not really over, because you're still keeping that real estate allocated to those old relationships, those old flames, those old things that on some level you're hoping will come back or will flourish. But if they're not going to, then you've got to set yourself free so that you can be open to whatever new blessings may come your way. I'm reminded of this story in the Bible of Abraham, and he had this boy, I believe Isaac. It was his favorite son, and in those days people would make sacrifices of animals or even human sacrifices. So you got to realize that's the context of this story, that burnt offerings and sacrifices were a way of showing loyalty to deity or to God. So God tells Abraham in this story to go take his son up the mountain and burn him alive as a burnt offering to God. And from a purely neutral perspective, I have to say that that is kind of messed up, because that's a terrible story, really, when you take it at face value. But as an allegory, though, it does illustrate a good point. So Abraham trusts God, and he goes up the mountain, and he thinks to himself, you know, I have to be faithful to God, so therefore I will do what I was asked to do. And I will just trust that everything will work out the way it should. So he goes up there and he trusts, he has faith. And then as he gets to the very top of the mountain, when he gets to that point where he would actually have to kill his son, that's when he sees that there was this perfect lamb there in the bushes, basically just waiting to be harvested and sacrificed. So he was able to sacrifice the lamb. He did not have to give up his beloved son after all. And it was a test of faith. It wasn't that God wanted him to kill his son. It was that he couldn't prove his faith until he surrendered the thing that was the most important to him. And when he got to that point of giving up the thing he wanted most, that's when he was able to secure and protect that thing and reach a point where he was secure in having the blessings that he wanted in his life. It's kind of like that, I think, for relationships and stuff. Sometimes when you want something, you chase it, you hope for it, and that doesn't make you the right kind of a person necessarily. And then you're thinking about things that aren't going to bear fruit in your life, and you're always hoping, that old relationship will start to bear fruit. That person that never really was there for you, one day they will be there for you. And as long as you're thinking that way, as long as you're hoping that you're going to be able to resurrect the dead, then you're too busy focusing on old things to truly make the most of the life that you have. There was a woman who I very much loved, and I knew her well before I even met my wife, and then things didn't ever really come to anything between us. And then I got married and moved on with my life, and then I got divorced, and then as it so happened, I started to be in touch with that old crush again, and then we would go back and forth. And I'm just bringing this up as an example of what I'm talking about, because it's personal and it's true. But now I started to have this kind of a sense that okay, maybe this old relationship from the past could bear fruit. Maybe it could be a good thing. Maybe it could be a chance, after all of the things that have happened, to to have a second chance, I guess, to make a relationship there. And that would be amazing. It really would. But then I also have to think about how, it didn't bear fruit before. And it's still been a thing where, you know, we just haven't really aligned and haven't really been able to move on anything, you know. And I think there's a lot of people out there, you know, she's probably one of them, where they, you know, people like to have attention. They want somebody to want them. They want to be desired, but they don't really want to commit. They're not really at a place in their life where they want anything meaningful. And that's okay, but it's not okay if you are pausing your life and you're waiting and waiting and waiting for somebody to get serious and want to have a genuine conversation and dialogue, and they don't, and they never will. But you're waiting. You're holding up that part of your heart for somebody who's ultimately just going to play games with you and tease a little bit and throw breadcrumbs, and then never really allow it to be anything more than that. You have to be careful about those kinds of things, because it's not that patience is bad. It's that investing your faith in people who don't demonstrate good faith is a waste of your time. And time is one thing we don't have an unlimited amount of. It's always possible to find more money, but it's, at least to my knowledge, never possible for us to find more time. We can't rewind the clock. So it's important not to let other people waste our time. It's important to be pragmatic and truthful and understand that maybe you love somebody, but maybe they don't love you in return. And if that's the case, then you continue to cherish what you love about them. And you can even remain open to good things happening if it does work out that way. But you hold your breath for it. You don't put your life on hold for people who aren't going to wait for you. One way to put it is don't cross the ocean for somebody who won't step across a puddle for you. And it's easy to make excuses for people, especially when you start to find yourself in a position where you're maybe lonely or you're wishing things would work out. Then you start to make excuses for other people. You start to think, oh, well, you know, they have a reason for what they're doing, you know, and they do. But it's not necessarily a good reason for you to wait around for them. Because the truth is, if people really respect you, if they really value you, then they're going to show it by being available and by finding ways to make you feel and know that you are valued to them. Any relationship has to go two ways. It's got to be a two-way street. And if it's not, then all it really is an empty fantasy. If I've learned anything, it's that it's better to have nothing, but to have no problems, than it is to have something that promises good things, but actually pushes you backwards. And an example of this would be when I was married. You know, I felt more secure in a way because there were two people in the household and we were supposed to be working together. We're a team. We're going to work together to pay bills and build a future and all of that stuff. But what was the truth? The truth was my ex-wife would spend all the money she had, and then she created a level of liability to where it was harder for me to save money. It was harder for me to be a good steward of my resources because I was compensating for her lack of discipline with hers and her tendency to have expectation that she wanted to be, you know, bailed out, or she wanted to have things bought for her, etc., etc. So I had more financial security without her there, but then it also is unsettling when you have to rely on yourself and you don't have anyone else around. But despite all the times when she would say, well, you know, if you don't have me around, then you're not going to do well or something. Well, the truth is I did a lot better. It was a lot easier for me to thrive alone than it was in that relationship. But then it felt better to have the relationship. And sometimes we just we hang on to things because they make us feel better, but the reality is they actually set us back. And that's the kind of stuff we want to avoid in our lives, because you want to be always open and receptive to good things coming into your life. And you can't do that until you surrender the things that bear no fruit. It's like the parable of the virgins waiting to get into the wedding, another Bible story. Some of them were outside waiting with lamps and extra oil, and then some of them only had the oil that was in their lamps already. They didn't bring any extra oil. And what happened was ultimately the ones who didn't come prepared, they ran out of oil and they had to go to the store to get more. And then while they were gone to go get more oil for their lamps, that's when the door opened and they were able to go in. But the ones who ran out of oil, they weren't there to go in when the door opened. And so that's a good allegory of maybe a lesson we need to learn, that you have to be ready to receive blessings in your life by letting go of the things that would take you away from the opportunities when they do avail themselves. So that's something that I've been trying to work on, to not always be gravitating back to those expectations of old things, old flames, old relationships, old hopes, always going back to those things and faithfully, just desperately wishing that they would bear fruit, when the truth is they've shown over and over again that they're not gonna. They never have. They probably never will. Doesn't mean you close the door. Doesn't mean you slam the door in the face of somebody and say, oh, I'm done with you. I'm never going to give you the time of day again. That's not what I'm saying. It's just, if things are not bearing good fruit in your life, then you have to look at the truth and you've got to say, okay, if I am not for myself, then who will be? You have to be your own firmest advocate. And that's hard. It's hard because We would rather bear and suffer burdens while they are bearable and sufferable than cast off those familiar chains and find new guards for our future security. We'd rather hang on to something familiar and hurtful than move on and face the reality of having nothing. And yet, when you open yourself to the reality of having nothing, then you often put yourself in a position where when something good comes your way, you're able to receive it. There's this guy I knew, still know, but he would get wrapped up in things like, I don't know, like mail order bride kind of situations. I don't know, but they were like these women, and they would always be somewhere overseas, and he'd get married, but his wife would never be around. And it was always the same kind of a story. Like, he's waiting, and then she's going to come to the States eventually, and it's all going to be great. But then in the end, this dude is just sitting alone, waiting for these women who are probably scamming him for some kind of immigration card or something. I don't know. It was weird. But this dude, he always fell into those same kind of traps. And why? Well, why is because he would rather have a comforting lie than face the reality of being alone. And so, as a result of that, he wound up pretty much always being alone, because how do you really find fulfillment if you're always taken, if you're always already devoted and sold on something that's going to keep you distracted while also bearing no fruit in your life? So sometimes you got to just embrace the loneliness, embrace the feeling of life not being quite right, but then also embrace the good things that life gives you to dwell on and the fun things that life provides you to do, and take advantage of all the time you have, all the opportunities you have when you have them. You know, I've been talking about how it's painful sometimes to be alone, but then I also think to myself, maybe I won't be alone for all that much longer. Maybe I will have a fulfilling relationship with the right kind of a woman, and it'll be great. But then what does that mean? That means that there's things that I will have time to do today, this month, this year, that maybe next year, next month, whatever it is, maybe I won't have the time to do some of those things, which means that on any given day, I want to make the most of every day. I want to catch up on those video games in my library that I didn't finish. I want to spend some time working on writing that novel that one day I'd like to publish. I want to spend the time working on developing the YouTube channel that I wanted to make, that requires a level of daily commitment and effort. I want to work on all this stuff and do these fun things, because every season of our life is different. And you never want to waste a season of your life because you feel like it's not good enough, it's not sexy enough, it's not exciting enough. Because then when you go into a different time of your life, you'll look back on the previous seasons and you'll say, man, why didn't I make better use of that time that I had? So always make the most of where you are and don't resent the position you find yourself in. Always look at the truth, not the familiar lies that you want to believe, but the reality of how things truly are. And then after that, I guess it all just boils down to life is pretty short, and despite all the things people say, it's really not that serious. So don't be afraid to be honest with people. Don't be afraid to say how you feel. Don't be afraid to pick up the phone and have a conversation with somebody. Because the truth is, when we get to the end of our life, we're not going to wish that we would have held back more. We're going to wish that we would have just laid things out frankly and honestly, and we're going to wonder why in the world we were so self-conscious about so many things that really didn't matter at all. Life matters too much for us to hold back on things that we love, things that we enjoy. So I will close with this thought. As an old friend of mine used to say many times, life has loveliness to sell. Buy it and never count the cost. Wherever you find yourself on your journey, remember that even if you feel alone, you're not alone. And even if things sometimes feel a bit bleak, there's always more hope than meets the eye. So try to be a light to others and always try to be gentle with yourself. Till next time, thank you for watching.